The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the stadium as the track underwent desperately needed maintenance. The girls all questioned what was going on as they were led into the pits by their somewhat crazy home economics teacher, Mr. White. It was a collection of several girls from several different schools, most of which were elves, with an angel, a devil, and 2 cat girls in the mix. In total, 16 students and their 4 teachers as chaperones, each girl wearing the differently colored uniforms of their respective schools. Heavy machines and street sweepers trundled along the racetrack beside them, sweeping what appeared to be rubber and other motor debris off the track. The girls all squeaked in terror at the sight of what was in the pits, though. The looming, imposing figure of 8 British-made Matilda medium tanks, parked where cars and racers should be. Each one seemed to be a perfect copy of the other, down to the rivets in their armor plating. The only differences were numbers painted on their turrets. Mr. White acted as a substitute in most schools, and was the one responsible for teaching all the girls how to drive, at least at one point. So they all knew who he was, and that he could be trusted. More trustworthy with their chaperones around, who would never let him get away with anything anyway. He stopped in his tracks in front of one of the tanks. Righty then. Hello, ladies. Welcome to the Valkyrie Speedway. Today you'll be learning the art of tank racing. He bellowed happily, gesturing to the armored vehicles around him. The girls all looked at each other and questioned the mental state of their teacher. They all knew he was crazy, but tank racing? What? Yes! Tank racing! One of the most complex sporting events in the world, and one of its least understood by non-humans. Yes, I did in fact say we race war machines for sport and entertainment. And today, that's what you will learn to do, he calmly said, with this oddly sadistic smirk. The students all glared at each other, half curious, half scared. But not ordinary tanks. No. These are specially made tanks that are built for racing. For the sake of reference, I brought a friend of mine from the local military museum to show you the difference between racing tanks and actual war tanks. Because I can't just let you have fun after all. We are still on school time. It has to be educational. He calmly smiled at them and gestured for everyone to follow him. Around the corner, sitting by the garage, along with some of the racetrack's service personnel, was an actual Matilda infantry tank, and its custom-made racing counterpart parked next to each other. Mr. White apparently didn't skip out on anything, as there were tables containing the full ensemble of historical displays, cutaways, and museum-level information displayed for all to see. In front of the display, some of the desks from the training room had been brought out and arrayed as a makeshift classroom. Ladies, this is the British Infantry Tank Mark II, more affectionately known as the Matilda Infantry Support Tank, he said, patting the steel hull of the 300-year-old war machine. And this is the Phillips & Boeing Mark VII Armored Racing Competition, Arc V Matilda D-Series Racing Tank. He moved over and gently patted the strangely hollow-sounding nanocarbon hull of the other. The girls all blinked in surprise, and the service crew around them clapped at the sight. All right, teacher mode is now engaged. Gents, please maintain silence for the duration of the lesson. Ladies, if you would please take your seats, he commanded, and started his lesson in earnest. The students quickly tussled with each other to find a good spot to sit, while the service crew moved back a respectable distance in the shade, where they could still hear the lesson. The teachers were given a table and chairs under an awning to relax, with some coffee while the lesson was conducted. To start, this is the Matilda Mark I. This was the only British-made tank to serve in the entirety of the Second World War, but was better known for its deployment in the North Africa campaign. It saw active duty from 1939 to 1955 in various states, and is considered by many to be a poster child of the British Army during that time. Not all. Many. Now, I know you read the textbooks I gave you yesterday for study period. So, who can tell me the weight, number of crew, and armament? A few seconds passed, and 3 girls' hands flew up at once. A cat girl named Saris was the one picked.
25 tons, 4 crew, and a 40mm main cannon.
Correct! Well done, Ceres. You can tell me the designer and manufacturer.
Hands shot up again, and a wood elf by the name of Cassie gave her answer. The design was made by Royal Arsenal Woolwich, and the company chosen to build them was called Vulcan Foundry.
Correct! Very good, Cassie. Now, who can tell me the engine specifications and armor plating?
The only angel shot her hand up and gave her answer. Armor specs are 20-78mm, and the engines are actually 2 engines, built on a common crankshaft.
Correct! Well done, Kimberly. It seems you actually did your homework. Surprising for a school with the lowest test scores in the district, he said, glaring at her teacher. The students and teachers all shuffled uncomfortably at that revelation. The service personnel all stifled chuckles and tried to look inconspicuous. Even though the students all came from 4 different schools, they all operated within the same general county, serving the same large metropolitan area. And sadly, it was one of the lowest scoring districts in the state. That is why we're doing what we're currently doing. Field trips such as this will hopefully spur you to your studies and improve your grades. All of you girls are here, owing to the fact you have the best in your respective schools. Hopefully, the fun and lessons you learn here will spur you on to do better, and then the school board can provide more funding for future lessons. Because currently, this little excursion is on my dime, not the school's, so treasure it, he said, receiving shocked looks from all present, as he basically said he paid for all of this by himself. The teachers all shuffled uncomfortably, and some members of the service crew started getting on calls with their bosses. In any case, on to the next part of the lesson. This, he bellowed, patting the hull of the racing tank, is the Phillips & Boeing Mark 7 Armored Racing Competition Vehicle, Arc V Matilda D Series Racing Tank. The Matilda DSR, to quote its track name. This is a racing tank. Now, besides the obvious, who can tell me the difference just by looking at them? What are the 4 primary differences between these 2 tanks? The class hummed to themselves as they thought. Finally, the only devil girl in the group raised a hand.
I'm guessing something like it's a race tank, so, speed, weight, armament, and armor?
Correct! Well done, Farah. Yes! Although they look the same in terms of outward appearance, the Matilda Mark I is 25 tons, while the DSR is 4.8 tons. The Matilda has a 40mm QF2 pounder, while the DSR has a 40mm Lego Industries autocannon. The War Matilda has a set of 2 diesel 6-cylinder 7-liter Leyland engines. The DSR has a single Phillips Boeing Clatterwall hydroplasma engine. The Matilda's top speed is a blazing 15 miles an hour on road, whereas the DSR is a beast with a speed of up to 95 miles per hour. He explained, pointing out all the components laid out on the tables. The service crew laughed at the massive difference in speed between the 2 tanks. The girls all just scribbled notes and carried on the lesson as normal. Mr. White's mobile phone chimed with an alarm. And with that alarm, we no longer have time for the lesson. Next week, I shall supply the whole school with those textbooks and make sure you all face a pop quiz as part of your school grade before the end of the month, he said. The service crew dissipated, and the girls all groaned at the concept of a pop quiz. Now we come to the fun part. Who wants to have a go? He said, patting the DSR's hull. This snapped everyone's attention, and a look of shock and horror crossed the teachers' faces. The service crew stopped mid-step, all gaining strange smirks as they paid close attention. You cannot be serious! You aren't seriously expecting these girls to race in those things? Mrs. Valoran, one of the teachers, quickly jumped out of her seat in protest. Oh, hell no! You honestly think I'm going to let a bunch of schoolgirls engage in one of the most dangerous sports in the entire world? Hell no! But it wouldn't hurt to have a bit of fun. That's what this is all about. Now, ladies, you're all of age and passed your firearm and driving tests, yes?
he asked. The girls all nodded and retrieved their permits and licenses, displaying them on their desks.
Then everything is done legally, and there isn't an issue. Now stand up and follow me. I will show you how tank racing works, if we have enough time,
he said, glancing at the service crew. The track's owner and primary operator, Mr. Burton, had appeared from his office, a grizzled war veteran with a few medals pinned to his office suit. He just smiled and gave a thumbs up, then went back into his office to make some phone calls.
Excellent. That gives us a little bit of time. Each student will do 1 lap around the course, and each of you will fire 3 practice shells from the main gun. Because we can. I've set up a target we can use for that. Come, who's first?
He said, and headed for the racing tank he had on display for the lesson, presumably one he had earmarked just for this purpose. Every girl jumped at the chance and raised her hand, climbing over each other to try it out.
Okay. Since everyone's so eager, we'll go with GPA as the base. Which means, Farah, you're up first because you have the highest GPA. But before we start, everyone has to pay attention here. It's time to talk about the most important thing. Safety.
He started a new lesson, one that the girls followed to the letter. How to clip their skirts down and secure blazers, so nothing got caught in any of the machinery. The use of the helmet, and even showing the 2 girls with wings how to safely secure them comfortably, so they don't flap about inside the cabin. And more importantly, the headset, which made sure they didn't deafen themselves over the sound of the cannons and engines, especially the cat girls with their sensitive hearing.
Now, for the most important aspect of this lesson. Who can tell me how the armor plating and cannons actually work in a tank race?
He asked. Blank stares all around in response. Even some of the service crew didn't seem to know.
That's the fun part. The hull is a mixture of high-grade steel sandwiched between a nanocarbon mesh and a layer of ballistics glass. There's a special sensor every few inches on every part of the tank. That tells an internal computer where the tank has been hit and simulates damage based on some very sophisticated tech. Inside the hull, there's a very powerful shield array that takes up half of the effective energy output of the tank's engines. That is what keeps the crew safe, which means, despite the dangers involved, being inside the tank is actually the safest place to be. The shells these things fire are also a special variant of shell to make it even safer.
With safety now out of the way, Mr. White and Farah climbed in, followed by a new person who arrived and climbed into the loader's seat in the tank.
Hey, kiddo! Welcome to Boomtown!
The new person said with glee and extended a hand to Farah. She smiled back, but glanced at Mr. White for clarification, just in case, and on receiving a nod, shook the stranger's hand.
My name is Carl. I shall be your instructor for the lesson. Your teacher is excellent, but he don't know jack about tank racing,
he said, and put on a headset.
Well, you've got me there.
The 2 men shared a chuckle, and the tank's engine started. Less the sound of a diesel truck, and more a soft, muffled whine of a turbofan jet engine. Each girl took her turn driving the tank. The controls of a racing tank looked and felt more like that of a car than a tank, purely because of some highly sophisticated computer tech controlling the drive system. Each girl completed 2 laps on the track, one to learn how to actually operate the machine, and one to actually try for a time to beat. Mr. White challenged his class to beat the track record, none of which did, of course. However, one of the High Elves, a girl named Amari, was given a badge, number, and track nickname when she managed to achieve 6th place on the track scoreboard. With Amari now officially on the scoreboard, her name lit up like a fireworks factory. This set off a somewhat competitive spark in the students as they lined up to fire the cannon. By this point, a few more track service personnel managed to filter in from their days off, and even a few drivers and gunners for respective racing teams arrived too, and were gearing up for a race, as each girl was taught how to operate the 40mm autocannon. Each student was allowed to mount the gun and stand at the edge of the track, and fire off 3 shells at a rusted selection of derelict vehicles parked in the middle of the track. Each shell was manually loaded, the autocannon usually present refitted to allow for less dexterous loading for the sake of the lesson, and each girl was given a lesson on gun safety before firing. Each girl who actually hit a target was given not only extra credit, but a chocolate bar as a reward for her effort. At the end of the lesson, the last girl popped her head out of the hatch and drove it back to its parking spot, where another, new and bulky-looking tank was sitting.
What's that?
The student currently driving asked, as she turned the DSR's engine off.
That would be a Sherman, the actual military version from what I can tell. What's it doing here, though?
Mr. White asked as he hopped out of the tank. Mr. Burton, the track's owner, appeared out of the gunner's hatch with a smile and wormed his way out of the tank.
Well, that's easy. My boys told me what you were up to here, so I got in touch with some friends of mine for a special event. I needed to bring old Rusty here for it. Why don't you give your students some lesson on the Sherman here, and we'll call when we're done?
He replied with a cheeky smile and disappeared into the pit. Mr. White simply shrugged, calling the students over and giving them a short lesson on the history of the American Sherman. In this case, the most basic factory-made variant. The girls were paying more attention than they ever did to the lesson, some even using their phones to scribble notes and take pictures of the tank's components, probably preparing for the coming exam on everything they saw here. Eventually, the students were called to the stands, where they finally noticed what was going on. An exhibition race had been hastily organized, and 5 of the tanks were arrayed on the track in starting positions.
Wow, okay, for the future, 5 tanks is the minimum for any tank race. Otherwise, it's rather short. There is a maximum of 24 tanks usually, and sometimes during nationals, the numbers can be buffed up to 30.
Mr. White explained to his students. A loud klaxon blared, and a strange type of music never heard before started to play. It was a song from a very old game from way back in the day called Bazooka Groove, and it started playing above the sound of the tank's engines. The buzzer sounded, and the tanks were off. The lumbering beasts charged off the line and raced with more speed and agility than any vehicle of its class had any right to. The speed caught the girls off guard, despite the fact they drove these things earlier. The tank's turrets were tracking each other, not firing, just staring at each other in a high-speed standoff.
The first stages of the tank race are just a race. 5 laps to start to set positions and get drivers accustomed. Then after 5 laps, the tanks will allow free fire,
Mr. White yelled over the noise.
Wait a minute! What about us in the crowd?
One of the teachers bellowed.
Military-grade shield systems. 100 years, no spectator's ever been injured during one of these,
Mr. White bellowed back, pointing at the retaining wall to show the shield projectors bolted to the floors. The tanks quickly did 5 laps, the song ending just as the first tank crossed the finish line. Then a rain of cannon fire burst out, and immediately one of the tanks was taken out, as it was hit 3 times by 2 separate tanks. The main track housing now blown off. The tanks just kept driving, racing each other as normal. Only every few seconds a volley of cannon fire would erupt. The race continued for a bit longer, taking a bit longer than expected to come to a conclusion as the tanks fought each other.
The rule is,
Mr. White bellowed at his students over the sound of cannon fire,
first to complete 20 laps or last man standing wins. You don't actually have to fire the gun to win. You just have to drive well so you don't get shot. Some races have a no-fire rule, where it's just speed and skill without the guns. With these small exhibition matches, it's only 10 or 12 laps.
As Mr. White finished his explanation, one of the tanks crossed the finish line after dodging a shell, and the klaxon horn sounded. That tank finished a total of 12 laps, leaving 3 of the tanks still running at the end of it all. The crew, in this case crews of 3 men in each tank, popped out of their hatches and raised their hands in celebration, as work crews and service crews drove in to put out fires caused by shell ricochets and other damage. The students and faculty, as well as a few other spectators that filtered in, stood up in a somewhat underwhelming, but still appreciated, standing ovation from the small crowd. The crews acknowledged it, raising their hands in a victory, and started clearing and cleaning the track for future events. Then, something unexpected happened. When the track was finally cleared away, the Sherman and Matilda, each one with an American and British flag bolted to its rear, trundled onto the track. The 2 tanks parked at the finish line. Everyone present stood up and saluted, half with the American salute, the other half with the British salute, as the US-EU Commonwealth Anthem started to play. The tanks started to move, trundling along the track as they performed a short parade around the track. The two tanks then parked at the finish line, each firing 2 shots from their cannons in salute. Mr. Burton snuck alongside Mr. White and leaned in to whisper. I figured we needed something a bit extra, so I called some buddies of mine. I might make this a regular thing, you know. Seems to fit, he said. Yeah, you're right. It fits nicely. I got some buddies at the Museum of Military History. Give you their number? I might convince them to send their Pershings and priests over for you. Mr. White replied quietly. Bitchin', Mr. Burton replied as the 2 men fist-bumped. The girls later completed their surprise exam, and the school board reallocated funding for more field trips and textbooks. Going over to the tank tracks quickly became a common field trip for all 4 schools in the district, as grades started to skyrocket in response to the positive feedback. More importantly, Mr. White was reimbursed what he spent on the lesson by the track's owners and sponsors, and used the recovered funds to buy his own custom variant of a Crusader racing tank for his school, and started teaching his students how to use it during extra lessons.